Hello, everyone. Welcome back. I'm one of your co-hosts, Rico Borrego,
I am your other co-host, Tony Borrego.
and this is Relatively Sound, the podcast of two bickering brothers giving you their musical opinions, whether you ask for it or not. Today's episode is part 2 of our monthly series, Album to Album. And last week, we took a listen to the Tragically Hip's album Fully Completely. Tony gave it a listen. It's an album that I've been in love with now for quite a little time. And this week now, we are here with his album recommendation. Tony, why don't you tell the listeners what you gave me to listen to this last week?
I gave Rico the task to listen to Small Change by Tom Waits. And now we're going to hear his thoughts on it.
I was just going to say, I'll preference it by saying that my relationship to Tom Waits is almost non-existent. I only knew 2 Tom Waits songs going into this album, neither of which are on this album. I knew Picture in a Frame, just because Eddie Vedder covered it at a couple Pearl Jam shows that I remember listening to. And I do really like that song, at least the cover. And then I also know of his song Come On Up to the House, I think that's what it's called. Because a local Seattle musician, Star Anna, covered it on one of her albums. But I couldn't even tell you what albums those are from Tom Waits' album.
Wait, hang on a minute, though.
Yeah.
Don't you also know Jersey Girl? Because didn't Springsteen cover
Yeah,
it?
that's true. I do know Jersey Girl, but to be fair, maybe it's just Springsteen's cover of it, because I've never heard the original of any of those songs. But yeah, Jersey Girl, I mean, anytime it comes up on like his live albums, I don't skip over it, but it's just, I don't know. There's something about Springsteen covers that I just don't always love, and maybe just because I love his original music so much, I just don't connect to them as much, which is unfortunate because he has an album coming out this Friday of this recording where it's a whole covers album of like 50s and 60s songs. So I can already tell I'm not going to like that album. But that aside, yeah, so I only knew those 3 songs. So I know growing up, you kind of had a phase where you got into him. But I never remember you playing him out loud much. So I really, again, don't remember ever hearing him. But I know of his importance. And the only information I know about him comes from a video I watch on YouTube. Great YouTube channel. Everyone should check out. They are called Taste Like Music. And it's 3 guys who usually will listen to an artist or band's discography and then rank them. And they did a week where they did Tom Waits albums. And I watched the video, but not knowing the songs. So I'm going to be very interested to go back to the video, at least now knowing this album.
Okay, interesting. So you didn't really hear anything of Tom Waits, even though I was listening to him. But the only reason I got into him was because of Primus. And I know what you're thinking. What is the connection?
Well, I know the connection, but you tell our listeners the connection.
Well, the Tom Waits has actually voiced Tommy in Tommy the Cat on one of their Primus songs. And he also, I think, did backup vocals on one of their other songs, Coattails of a Dead Man. I also know that Primus has played on Tom Waits songs before. The one I know is Big in Japan from Mule Variations. So knowing, Tom Waits' name, I was with the fam at the Everett Public Library and saw Bone Machine there on CD. So I went ahead and gave that a listen, and I was definitely hooked. The thing with Tom Waits, though, is his style has changed so much over the years, and he has a lot of variety that I know it is hard you kind of get into Tom Waits. And the reason I didn't have Rico listen to Bone Machine is because I thought that would have been a little too obnoxious for him, maybe. Um, Small Change was one of the albums I got into after Bone Machine, but I thought it was easy to get into. Um, and I think it's a good pick because to me, it does capture the sort of drunken jazz style of his first few records. And it's unlike the first two of his, it does have his signature, raspy voice, which is an understatement. Um, but I like that it sort of feels autobiographical, if that's how you say that word. Um, and I'm really curious to, your thoughts on the album.
Well, I will tell you that on first listen, it actually was kind of what I was expecting it to be, which is, I think, kind of how you felt last week listening to Fully Completely by the Hip, where just from my preconceived, what I already knew about him, the little that I knew about him, for the most part, this album kind of fit with, again, the narrative I had of him. And but I will say I was more impressed, I think, than I thought I was going to be, because I remember you telling me you originally were actually going to have me listen to another one of his albums. What was the album you were going to have me listen to?
I was going to suggest his debut album, Closing Time. And the point being that it's not a very weird album. It's a lot easier to digest. It's more inviting. But I didn't think that really was a good representation of Tom Waits. And once again, him having a lot of different styles throughout his career makes it hard to pick one album to jump into. But I thought this one was just a good starting point that had a lot of his, trademark characteristics. And I also thought it was more of a consistent album than maybe some of his other works.
But I do remember you also telling me you're like, I'll I'll give you small change if you're going to be okay with his voice, because you're like that's kind of when his voice started to kind of get that classic Tom Waits sound. Because again, that's another thing I knew about him was he has, I guess a more kind of rough, gravelly voice. And I was okay with that. I mean, I told you I was okay with that because when it comes to singers, I listen to a lot of people, a lot of singers who maybe don't have the most like pleasantly sounding voice, whether it's Dylan or, even like Tom Petty, even though I think he has a really, great voice, like he's not for everyone. Or even Neil Young. Again, Neil Young is like, some people love his voice and then probably some people find it really annoying. So I listen to a lot of singers that, don't have the most maybe amazing sounding voice, but I'm okay with that if their music really speaks to me, whether it's the lyrics or the actual music itself. So,
And they have to
you know,
sound like they know what they want to do with their voice. That's
yeah,
my thing. Like that's why I think Les Claypool, I don't think of him as a great singer. I think of him as a great vocalist.
yeah. So I was okay with, his voice going into this, knowing it might be more kind of that rough Tom Waits voice. And yeah, again, first listen, I maybe was a little surprised by how not similar the song sounded, but I guess the approach to a lot of the songs. I mean, there's a lot of themes. I guess the first theme being just looking at the songs, the names of the songs. I literally have to have the track list in front of me because he was in love with parentheticals when it came to naming the songs on this album, because every song but three of the songs have parentheses after them. And some of them are like really, really long. And so I found that kind of interesting. And I was kind of curious, like, oh, was there a reason why he did that? Like, like I've just never seen the album. So I'm like, is this kind of like a concept album? And then when I listened to it musically, I was like, okay, this has a little bit of like jazz. I mean, mostly the main instruments are piano, I would say bass, and then some of the songs kind of
Upright
have,
bass, yeah.
yeah, and then some of the songs have some orchestral moments, backing them strings. A song has like saxophone, and then a little drums, but a lot, I would say like half of the songs are just very kind of his voice and like a piano, or his voice and one other instrument. And I guess I was a little surprised, but then when I thought about it, I'm like, well, it's not like I ever see him, like I don't have any images of him like playing acoustic guitar, like, singer songwriter in that sense. So I guess I shouldn't have been too surprised, but I liked a lot of the music on first listen. At worst, some of them are maybe just a little forgettable, but there's a lot of songs like, the opening track, which I know is called Tom Traubert's Blues, if I said that correctly. I'm just going to call it Waltzing Matilda because basically that's what it is. And when I gave this album a listen, um, I did not have the lyrics in front of me. I just kind of gave it an open listen. I didn't do any research. So when I did research for this song, and I was like, oh, the chorus is basically based off an Australian folk song called Waltzing Matilda. I'm like, oh, that makes sense. But I was like, why didn't he just call it that? Because that's what he's singing the whole chorus. But it makes sense. He's not going to name it after an already, relatively popular song. But like that song, I will say it was, I wasn't sure, and I still don't know how I feel about it being an opener because it's kind of like a ballad. It's very pretty. It's when the strings come in, it has a very, pleasant, nice sound to it. And I do think actually when those vocals hit, I'm like, okay, yeah, this is going to be his voice the whole album. But again, it was not a con to me in any sense, because again, I was prepared for it, and it, it didn't really distract me. There may be some moments on some other songs, but like that song, it did. And I do think that song, Waltzing Matilda, he has a very, passionate performance. His vocals seem raw, but in like a different sense than the actual vocals. Like the performance seems very raw. But then like the next song, Step Right Up, it's like, it's a 180 because it's like, yeah, you get in that stand-up bass that you're talking about. And it's a really kind of, jiving song. I mean, it's not like super crazy when it comes to like, the instruments, but it's definitely a step in, I would say, a direction I prefer. And then kind of from there, I would say the first half is, kind of a little bit more tame, a little bit more like straightforward songwriting musically. The second half is maybe more interesting, although I think I almost prefer the first half, because the second half, there's certain songs that struck me right away. So Step Right Up was one, and The Piano's Been Drinking was another one that really stood out to me, because I'm like, without having the lyrics in front of me, that was like the first song I was like, okay, there's a lot of that and Step Right Up, I guess, both had like a lot of like funny lyrics and a lot of, Step Right Up was mostly like funny, but then like Piano's Been Drinking had funny lyrics, but then also like seemed a little sad, because one of the themes that I took from this album was a lot of it was maybe him with the drinking problem. And then side two had like a lot of interesting moments. Like it has Pasties and a G String, which I don't love that title, but that one is like very like, it's like the shortest song on the album, but it's also like maybe like the weirdest song on the album. Like it's almost like he's doing like a rhyme, kind of like, it's very, I don't want to call it rap, but it's just like him citing off these random lyrics. One that got away, I believe that's the one where it's just like him and like a bass, which is interesting. And then Small Change is just kind of like him and a saxophone, which is cool. Although on first listen, I didn't appreciate that as much. It had a lot of variety, especially in the second half, that I enjoyed. But I think the first half, from the first song to The Piano's Been Drinking, had the songs on it that I think were more straightforward and more likable on first listen. But I was impressed mostly because of the lyrics. And even though I've listened to this album now probably like 10 times over this last week and a half, the lyrics are still like the sticking points to the songs, especially the ones that I don't love the music to as much. The lyrics are like, there's always like a line that sticks out to me different on each listen, which I really appreciate because I lyrics to me are very important in a song. And I listen to a lot of bands and stuff where, you know, their music might be pretty simple, but because of the lyrics, either so like personal or they connect to me so much or they're so unique or creative, I just really love them. And I will say his lyrics really stuck out to me. I can't say I like connected to them, because again, I think a lot of the lyrics, I mean, I would say there's like maybe at least 3 or 4 songs that are like at least mention, I would assume, his drinking problem. But I mean, a lot of the lyrics were just like, there's a couple songs where it's just like him telling a story, which storytelling songs, if done right, can be some of my favorite types of songs. So um, I do think with this album, even though musically it might not be one I'm in the mood for a lot of the time, it's one that I think lyrically I'm just going to enjoy every time I listen to it.
And that's another reason why I picked this album for you, is because I feel this one. Well, so the musical landscape, I do agree with you. It does kind of run into each other. It's very, you know, it it all has the same sound. It's very centered. Which is kind of interesting because the last album, Nighthawks at the Diner, that's not one of his that I know very well, but it's done to be one of those albums where it's supposed to sound like a live album, like he's playing at a bar in front of people. And to me, this album kind of also feels like that in certain spots, just without all the kind of gimmicky aspects of it. And I think without trying to have the whole live crowd, live performance sort of goal, the lyrics are able to come out, and be heard better. And I don't know, this just feels more concise. And honestly, I think the humor is pretty good on this album. I feel like it's pretty appropriate when it's done, and when it's done well. Did you enjoy the comedy aspect of the lyrics?
Yeah, I did. Especially like on a song like Step Right Up. That one was like probably on the first listen, I'm like, this is like my clear favorite. Now going back, it's a little harder to tell if there's might be a couple others that I might enjoy better. Because this one is like super funny and the music fits like perfectly with it. I mean, he's pretty much like he's a salesman who's just, you're not sure what he's selling. Like at no point does he say what it is that he's selling. But I love as the song goes on, he's just using these terms that are just like so perfect, like 50% off. And he's telling you all the things that it'll do. And like it gets to the point where it's like, I don't know what to expect anymore when he's like, it'll find the slipper that's under your chair and, you know, it'll get rid of unwanted facial hair and,
Mail
there,
back unused portion of product for a complete refund.
yeah. And it's just, and that one is, it's also his performance of it is so great. Like, I don't know, because I did some research on the album, but surprisingly there wasn't at least, just the very brief research I did. It's not like there's like a ton of lore behind this album. So I'm curious, like on this song, if it's one that he just kind of like ad libbed. Maybe he had some of the lyrics, maybe he didn't, because it's just like some of it seems like I don't know how you could come up with that on the spot unless you're just a genius. But then some of it is just like,
How could you perform it that good? Like some of it feels so like spontaneous.
yeah, and it just it's yeah, it was very entertaining, and it just kind of like as it kept going on, I was just like, okay, like what was he gonna say next? Like I was totally into the song, and yeah, it's a song where like he doesn't. There's no point where he's singing, really. I mean, a little bit, but it is mostly just him, like just kind of going off at being a salesman, and Yeah, it just like yeah, there a lot of those lyrics in that song in particular I was laughing at. So what was the one line? There was one line where he's like, "It'll give you an erection," which I'm just like,
It'll give you an erection that wins the election.
yeah, which is funny because we were recording this on election day. Hopefully you voted. Um,
Oh,
but
I'm so
yeah,
glad it wasn't the first thing we're recording on.
yeah, and yeah, I even like the part at the end too. There's like a part where like near the end, he kind of just like grumbles a little bit. He's like, "Oh, stop bothering me, kid. Get away from me." Like,
Yeah, I just noticed that part like in particular today. I was like, that actually is very funny.
yeah. So like that, when you're asking me about the comedy, like, yeah, that one really stood out. You know, the piano has been drinking is another one that like, really stood out to me too, because obviously he's talking about, his drinking problem, but he's like, no, the piano has been drinking. And because the parentheses is not me. And,
Right.
you know, he's singing it as if he's like super drunk, he's super wasted. And again, it's like that performance, at least on the record, where it's just really, he's like selling it, especially because you like the music behind that one, like Step Right Up, the music fits perfectly because like if you're telling someone to stand, step right up, like you want something that's kind of jazzy, kind of like get you on your feet, but and like this one, it like has like a very drunken kind of like, rhythm to it. And like the piano melody is a little like kind of off, but like intentionally. So
Right. A
um
little blurred, we'll say.
yeah, so that was another one. Now that song, unlike Step Right Up, is not one that like the first couple times you hear it, it's like kind of funny, and then after that I feel like it's not that like it gets on my nerves or anything, but I feel like it loses its humor a little bit, where like Step Right Up, I don't know, every time I listen to it it's just like super funny.
Right. It's never not going to be funny.
Yeah, and then I would say Patsy's in a G string. It's not that it's like that's like okay, like so if I said Step Right Up as like perfect humor, and the piano's been drinking is like pretty on par with I think the humor. I do feel like pasties is like it's a little much, like it's a little. I appreciate it's short, and I guess maybe one small issue I had with the album was I think if some of the songs were trimmed a little bit, I would have enjoyed them a little bit more. But with like pastries, it's just like you know it has funny moments, but then it has some moments that are like a little like I kind of raise my eyebrow a little bit. He's talking about like cleavage and thighs and hips, and a line about Chinese algebra that I don't really want to get into. That I can see why that was funny at the time, and I people could still find it funny now, but it was just like I don't know. With that song, I think he was trying a little too much at the humor, and I don't know if that's going to be like how I'll think of his albums going forward if I listen to more of his records, whether it's like sometimes his humor is spot on and then sometimes it's like can get a little lost.
Yeah, I will say though, kind of to I guess defend the song. I do agree with you. It feels a little I would just say it feels kind of gimmicky. But I
That's
do
a good
think the
word.
kind of the saving, part about it is it really does fit the album. I mean, you look at the album and it's Tom like sitting hunched over, his hat down, like there's cigarette smoke, there's, like a stripper, I'm guessing, or basically that. Um, and he's singing songs where, he's drunk sounding and all of that. Like he's really nailing that that character. Like each song he kind of plays a different character, but he's kind of building up this big kind of image. And I do think that that song does add to that a lot, which I think it being short probably helps the album overall. But I do agree with you that, like if you look at it at face value, it is just kind of like a short novelty track.
Yeah, especially because like I feel like especially with the second half of the album, I feel like there's songs that are like very certain moods and certain styles. Like that one where it has a cool drum beat, pasties, and he's just kind of like, doing his whole thing. But then you have a song like the one that got away. Like that one, I like the style a little bit more of, where it is also just like bass and drums and his vocals. But like that one, the storytelling is a little bit more like focused. Where the other song, it seemed like he was just sometimes like random words and stuff. But like this one kind of has more of like a story. One that I still don't know if I fully understand, but you know, it's one that I can listen to and I can try to conjure up the images in my mind and try to kind of figure out what is actually about. And then, same thing with like the title track, which on first listen, I was disappointed with the title track because we might have talked about this before on the hip episode, but like when it comes to the title track, I either think it needs to be like the statement of the album or just like the best song on the album, or even if it's just the band's like favorite song, and I was a little disappointed with this one because like it just wasn't my favorite on first listen, but I'm gonna say it's one of the ones that's probably grown on me each time I've listened to it from the first time. And I just really like, I don't know, I like the storytelling in this one because I feel like it's also just like the images, just I can picture them in my head better than I can some of the other songs. And someone online commented that it's like a noir story, which is funny because Day for Night, the next hip album, a lot of it was inspired by a film noir that Gord had watched during that time, and it does kind of have that really old school, like guy on the street watching something happening, and he's kind of like describing it and stuff. And I do like how vivid the description is, but I will
It
say,
is pretty brutal.
yeah, I will say though on this album, I think there's only one other story song on here that like, because there's some other songs in this album where it's not the lyrics so much why I like it, but it's like the music. Because like, Jitterbug Boy, that one on first listen I remember enjoying it, but I like it didn't stick with me as much. But then for some reason, the second or third time I listened to it, I like really love the chord progression on the piano. Like I like the little melody that you first hear at the beginning, and it only happens a couple times in the song. And because I recall too, this is like one of the shorter songs on the album. Yeah,
Right, I can check
and
that. I have it up.
yeah, it is one of the shorter songs. And I just love when he's singing the times where I, I don't know, like if like the chord is just changing like the root note, bass note, but it's just subtle enough that I love it. It's kind of like when I'm writing songs on piano, I kind of do the same thing. And that's a song where it's like I don't even know what he was singing about, but I just really, really liked the music behind it and the way he sang it too. And because and for this song, I feel like his voice works so well. Like the grab, like every time the song starts and he starts, yeah, I'm a jitterbug boy. Like it's like, oh, like that's great. But then when I looked up the lyrics, this was a song that I liked even more when I looked up the lyrics because it does sound like gibberish. It sounds like he's basically the whole song. He's just kind of bragging about things that he supposedly has done. And I'm assuming most of this is not biographical, like autobiographical. I'm assuming it's like a character, which I do love songs where the singer is singing in a character's voice. And it's just kind of him BSing. And I kind of like that about the song. Like, it's just, and then I especially like at the end where he's like, flipping a quarter and he's like,
If it's heads, I'll go to Tennessee. And if tails, I'll buy a drink.
Yeah, and keep talking to you. And because I totally didn't hear that line when the first even maybe 4 or 5 times I listened to the song because I just was lost in the music. And then when I the first time I heard it and it ends with the scatting, I was like, okay, yeah, this is again a little too on the nose. Like you know, I don't really need scatting. But then I like to imagine it like he flips the coin, the quarter, and it does land on tails. And when you hear him scatting, it's him like buying the drink and he's like still talking to you. And then he's like, the scatting is just you kind of trying not to listen to what he's saying because you're just tired of this old man having this conversation with you. So I do like that song because of that. But that's one I really love the music of. Same kind of the same thing too with the closing track. I can't wait to get off work. It like from the very beginning of the song, like musically, it does like just a couple of chords. It's very like not relaxing, but there's something about, and I think it has to do with the song being like, I just can't get off work and see my baby, and it's a very relatable song, you just getting ready to get off work so you can go be with your loved one, and the music just fits it so perfectly. So that's like another one where I was just like, you know, really, really pleased with, especially like it being a closing track. I love songs that kind of end on like almost like a see you later type of vibe. And that's kind of how I got with this song. Um, so that was like another song that like the music, just the music alone sold me on it, as opposed to like the lyrics in some of these ones. Cause like I said, Small Change, The One That Got Away, those ones sold me. And the opening track, basically Waltzing Matilda, like that's one where it's like the music doesn't do a lot for me other than the fact that it's just like pretty. But then it's like the very detail oriented lyrics where I'm like, okay. And I did look up the song and it's like very true. Like he met, oh, what was it? He met like a singer, uh, and her name was Matilda. And like he spent time with her in Copenhagen, which is in the parentheses of the song, 4 sheets to the wind in Copenhagen.
No, that's Germany, right?
Denmark.
Oh,
Yeah.
Denver. Okay.
And yeah, like that that song, like musically, again, doesn't do a lot for me, but like lyrically, like him like telling the story, and at parts it seems like so kind of over the top, but I don't know, he like it never seems not real, which
You
I
know,
enjoyed.
something I read, which which probably the same story, really, but just phrased different. I heard that the song was about getting drunk and throwing up in a different country. So I tend to focus on that part of it as opposed to the actual Matilda part. Um, but yeah, no, I agree with you though. Like I think the big thing for him is his delivery. I mean, I think his lyrics are very strong. I mean, they can be a little far out, but I think when his lyrics are strong and his delivery is on point, then I got nothing to complain about. Like he sells the song.
Yeah, and there's like okay, so there's like a song like if I'm being honest, my least favorite on the album is one we
I was
haven't
gonna
talked
say
about
there's a
yet.
few songs you haven't mentioned, and I'm gonna be honest, you haven't mentioned some of my favorites.
Yeah, well, maybe one of your favorites is my least favorite was Bad Liver and a Broken Heart. That one, it's just like I don't know, it enters my mind and then leaves my mind the second it enters it. Now there's parts in it where it's like the piano kind of like speeds up a little bit because like the way he's singing it like it's trying to match his vocals, or maybe he's trying to match the melody of the piano. And I do like that part of the song. But like by this point in the album, like this is just like kind of another song where it's kind of about his drinking problem, obviously about like a struggle in a relationship, which again, like, it's probably relatable to a lot of people, but that one just it do a lot for me, and it just has not grown on me. Like that's the only song that, because even like some of the, again, pasties and the one that got away, some of the more like kind of storytelling are very kind of more like vocals and then just another instrument. Those ones I can appreciate when I listen to the album, even if they're not my favorite, or like even the piano's been drinking. But Bad Liver just, I don't know, it doesn't do a lot for me. I don't know if that's one of your favorites.
That one actually, I mean, I don't know now because I re-listened to the album a bunch, to prepare myself as well. But that one definitely is like top three for me, easy. And I'm surprised that you didn't like it more because first off, I think the music in it is beautiful. I know it's just like piano, but I think it's a very nice melody. There's even like the little flashy bit where he does the really cool, I don't know what you would call it, piano run sort of thing. Um, to me, it feels like the more serious take of the piano has been drinking. Like I still think some of the lines are pretty funny. It's just there's more sting to them. Like, starts off with I don't have a drinking problem except when I can't get a drink. Like to me, I think it does a better job telling a story by using sort of like little fragments, almost like he's kind of indirectly telling you the story and situation. But um I don't know. I'm trying to think of why it's kind of like forgettable to you. Do you think like album placement is like a big factor?
Maybe because like I do feel with the second half, like the first half, Waltz and Matilda, even though it's like, again, it's more of a ballad. There's a lot more instrumentation because of like the orchestra in it. Step Right Up is by far the most like upbeat song on the album. And then yeah, the next two songs, Jitter Bug Boy and I Wish It Was in New Orleans. Those are kind of slower piano ones. But then the rest of the album, like I said, there's a lot of songs where it's just him and one instrument, which I guess is kind of the whole album. But I guess my point is just like, yeah, by the time it's like the eighth song on the album, I would have loved like another kind of song with like drums. And maybe that's my another one of my small complaints is, and it's not that I'm even like someone who needs drums on all my songs, because I can listen to like a live album of Warren Zevon, just him and acoustic guitar, and love it. Or, Ben Folds and the piano and love it. But yeah, it's like I would have liked just a little bit more variety in the music. But again, it's like also too, just like the melodies, besides kind of the melody again, like where it kind of matches up with piano and it does like you said, there's that little like piano run. There's just the rest of it. And like I do like the lyrics, but they don't stand out to me as much either because I don't feel like they're overly funny, but then I don't feel like they're overly interesting. So I don't know. It's just like it fits with the album musically and especially lyrically, but I just feel like it doesn't. I just don't connect with it as much.
Speaking of kind of like the track listing album placement, especially how we've been kind of going back to how the second half is a little more varied. But something that really bothers me when I listen to the album, and I want to know if it bothers you, I think the worst part in the album flow easily is the one that got away into Small Change. I feel like it's kind of like two slow paced songs, back to back, and they're both like storytelling. The only difference is that, the one that got away is kind of it's harder to piece together what the full story is, but it also is kind of humorous. And then you go to the whole, crime story of Small Change. Like to me, that was a real lull in the album. And then you get out of it with I Can't Wait to Get Off Work, which I love the song. And I love that it ends the album, but I don't know. I feel like that's a big kind of drag in the album for me.
Yeah, I agree with you, and I think the reason you probably feel that way is because again, the one that got away is just like what him and mostly a bass, right? Stand-up bass, and then Small Changes along with him, mostly a saxophone. So again, it's like one of those. Both those songs are just like his voice and one instrument instead of like his voice and a whole band, and that's cool because I don't listen to a lot of songs like that. But yeah, them being back to back, maybe it would have worked better if there was a song. Even maybe if they would have put Bad Liver after the one that got away, and then Small Change, and then I Can't Wait to Get Off Work. Um,
That might
I
have been
actually,
good.
I actually think my least favorite two together is probably Pasties and Bad Liver, just because those are like my two least favorite on the album. But it's also because it's the same thing. It's Pasties is just him and like a drum, and then Bad Liver I consider more like a real song with like piano and stuff. But yeah, I there's a couple moments that, and even like the opening track into Step Right Up is very jarring on first listen. And I don't know if it was because I listened to it on Spotify. I don't know if it's a Spotify thing or the album thing, but there's a couple songs where it had like a long kind of moment of silence. Like I can't remember exactly what song. I want to say Waltzing Matilda, and there was another one too where there's like kind of like extra silence than I was expecting. And I don't know if that was done on purpose, but
I haven't noticed exactly. So I kind of wonder if it is on purpose because I think a big part of this album is the whole like bar atmosphere. So I imagine they probably did want some kind of like ambience to it, I suppose. Just a guess.
yeah. Now, I will say, I do think in the centerpiece of the album, because this album is what, 11 songs. If the album was 12 songs, then, the middle would be Invitation to the Blues. And I do kind of consider this like the centerpiece of the album.
And real quick, this is what starts side two of the album.
Yes.
According to Wikipedia, I don't have the actual record
Yeah.
yet. So
Yeah. And I would assume, not knowing fans, their favorites, I guess only knowing the three guys on Taste Like Music over on YouTube, I would seem like this is one of his. I know Waltzing Matilda was one of his signature songs. After I did the
right.
research, but like Invitation to the Blues to me seems like it would also be like a classic because it sounds very classic. For me, never hearing it and not recognizing it, it just seems like a very classic song in the sense that like the music is maybe the most interesting like progression and like piano in the whole album. Like because like some songs like Bad Liver and Jitterbug Boy and I Wish It Was New Orleans, like the piano doesn't necessarily sound like it sounds nice, but it doesn't necessarily sound like very like mind blowing. Where like Invitation to the Blues, it's very bluesy. It's like very dark. This song is also very noir kind of inspired. And this one on first listen was another favorite of mine. And it might be my favorite on the album. Again, it's like Step Right Up. I really like, but it's do I call that my favorite because it is like one of just the kind of goofy songs, lyrically. But this one has lyrics. This is to me the best lyrics on the album. Like this is a story kind of like just perfectly described. Kind of it opens up with this waitress at a restaurant working, and he's kind of describing how she looks like and what she does, and then it kind of goes into conversation where she's asking him, how does he like his eggs, medium or
Or
scrambled.
scrambled.
But he doesn't even say egg. Like that's just the way he's phrasing it as of like it cuts into her asking, this person like, what do they want to eat? How do they like their eggs? And this one is just like the music's so good, the lyrics are so good,
The
and I like
saxophone near the end. Oh my gosh, that's hauntingly good.
great, and I like how a lot of the verses ends with uh, the title Invitation to the Blues, and it's also kind of like I guess up to interpretation a little bit because like in the song he kind of makes it seem like maybe she's kind of the loose cannon and maybe he's kind of taking this narrator what is kind of taking a risk, because it sounds like she just got out of like a bad relationship, but like, you know, maybe it was her, but then maybe it was this other guy. I don't know. It is still open up to interpretation, but I just love the way it's described, and it seems like it could be the start of like a film, and the moody music just fits it so well. And I do know at least one of the guys on the Taste Like Music YouTube channel put this in his top 10 songs because after they rank all the albums, they will do a separate video where they give their top 10 songs from the whole discography. And I know one of them had, maybe two of them, I think, had this in their top 10. So, yeah, this one is like very classic. Like this was the one where I'm like, everything kind of this album I think is trying to do nails it on this song. Which is funny because I don't even think there's really any mention of drinking in the song. Well, no, there is.
Yeah, there's the part where um like he's drunk.
Yeah, yeah,
They
yeah,
took the registration, the car keys, and her shoes.
yeah. You're right.
Um,
So again, yeah, then exactly it is the perfect combination of the themes of the album, the music, the instrumentation, and like his vocals fit perfectly. I almost can't imagine someone else singing this song. And really, a lot of these songs I can't imagine someone else singing, but especially this one because I feel like his vocals, like the tone and just the roughness to it, just really adds to the song. And my guess is this your favorite? Because that would have been my guess.
I guess I haven't really thought about what my favorite is, but honestly, I would probably say so. I mean, now that I'm kind of like looking back at the lyrics, which is something that not that I've never had paid attention to the lyrics, but these last few listens that I've recently given, that's something I've been focusing on, and I do agree with you. It's a hell of a story. And what I think is really interesting about the song is that there's so many moments that feel like really like powerful and like oh the story's picking up, but if you kind of tune out all the lyrics, the song like musically isn't quite as dynamic as you would kind of expect. It really is his delivery and his back and forth between, oh, like this is the conversation between these people. Oh, this is happening right now. Oh, I feel this way. Like there's so many different I guess aspects to the story, and I think that's just really what makes the song, the monster it is. And something too that I always find kind of interesting to me is that so this starts side 2 and it ends with an I'll accept the invitation to the blues. And then the next song is Pasties in a G string, which seems unfitting, but to me, I could almost imagine it sort of like this guy's just like giving in. He's like, screw it. He talks about a battle with booze in it. So he's kind of just like maybe he's just giving up and then having sort of like a last hurrah. He's partying, gambling, drinking. So I don't know. Thematically, it also kind of puts the album in a cool spot.
Yeah, that makes sense to me. I I do agree, especially when you're like talking about powerful moments and kind of the sequencing of the album. Because the song before, you're talking about the song after, but the song before it, I Wish I Was in New Orleans, is kind of, it was kind of like
Well, wait,
Jitterbug.
that's not the song right before. The piano has been drinking
Oh,
is
that's
right
true.
before.
That's true.
But continue though, because it's still relevant.
Well, I guess, but kind of both those songs. The piano has been drinking, which comes right before it, and I Wish I Was in New Orleans. They're kind of again like especially I Wish I Was in New Orleans is kind of softer, and that's like kind of the one song on the album where I feel like he is just kind of singing like very straight from the heart. And okay, I'm gonna describe something to our listeners. that I've talked to I think to you about before. It's a weird thing I do. I a lot of times I will associate songs with certain seasons, and that's not too weird on its own. A lot of people I think do that. Songs that are like summery, songs that are like more for the fall or winter, and then of course you have holiday themed songs. But for some reason, I have like a growing list of songs in a category I like to call Thanksgiving songs. And it basically, if I listen to a song and it's like kind of very relaxed, very kind of calming, maybe has like a feel good kind of music to it. Sometimes it can have strings. It just kind of makes you feel a little warm inside, but it's a very like kind of simple song with not a lot of bells and whistles. I kind of call that like I don't know. It's a song that I can like imagine listening to after your Thanksgiving meal where you're full of food and you're tired and you're inside your warm house and you're like about to fall asleep on the couch. Like that's kind of the music I associate with that kind of moment on Thanksgiving. And I wish I was in New Orleans kind of gave me that feel. It is one of the other songs with the orchestration and like the strings that I think it even maybe does a smoother job than Waltzing Matilda.
I was just
And
thinking that too.
yeah, like it's a little bit more subtle and I don't know, it's just and again, I think it's one of the shorter songs on the album.
I
Yeah,
believe so.
it's
Yeah.
I mean it's kind of middle. It's not quite 5 minutes like some of them, but and it's definitely not the longest, which is Waltzing Matilda. But it's yeah, like it doesn't seem very long because lyrically, I think it's got a lot of music where it doesn't have as many lyrics, but I like that because in these lyrics, it's like really they're really honed in. He is literally just singing about how he wishes he was in New Orleans. And like, yeah, he does mention like a bottle, so like, a little bit of drinking in there, but he's also just like, you know, talking about playing some pool. He's describing the sound New Orleans as like a tenor saxophone, which I think is really cool because, there's so much music in New Orleans. And he's talking, when the Saints go marching in, and then maybe like the most unexpected lyrics, but like also a lyric that I think fits very well is that he's talking about red beans and rice. Like it maybe chuckled the first time, but then like the more I listen to it, I'm like, oh, that's not even really a funny lyric because it's just like him describing his love for New Orleans. And one thing that I just noticed too is that um, he mentions the name Chuck E. Weiss or Weiss, um, which is actually in the parentheses of Jitterbug Boy, I believe, right?
Yes, yes, it is. I was gonna mention that if you didn't catch it, but I had a feeling you would catch it.
Well, I only just caught it earlier today because I was like, I had the lyrics up in front of me and was kind of giving another dive. And I actually I like that. I love when a song calls back to another song. And actually, I forgot to mention in the hip episode, there's two songs where he mentions garbage bag trees. I think it's Looking for a Place to Happen and At the 100th Meridian. And if you listen to more hip, he does that all the time. Gord is always like referencing, you know, song titles and other songs or just like specific lyrics. And there'll be like an album where he just like, there's like a word he just keeps repeating. Like he'll like say it twice. Like there's one of their albums where he mentions the word caramelized onions in two different songs. So
That is not by coincidence, I promise.
yeah, and that's something I can appreciate with Tom Waits is that I like how he did something like that where it's like he doesn't mention it in the other song, but in this song he does. So, but yeah, this song just has like a very relaxed, and that's why I'm like, it's not a Thanksgiving song to me because he mentions red beans and rice or anything like that. It's just I don't know. It just has like a very just like peaceful kind of quality to it. Very like warming. It's probably like besides the closing track, like the sweetest moment I think on the album. And even on first couple listens, I kind of thought this was a little forgettable. Because I wouldn't call anything in this album filler, but I was like, I wish I was in New Orleans. It's a little forgettable. But now every time I listen to it, like I like it more and more. So it's also one of those other ones that like really grew on me. Um,
I think having like you digesting the lyrics and having like the understanding of it really does enhance the song. Because I was sort of the same way, but then the more I listened to it, like compare it to Step Right Up, which is basically just like if you were to write those lyrics down, it's just this list of things she's yelling. Even Invitation to the Blues, that's like a page from a novel. But this one is only like a couple slow sung verses. It's very minimal, and like you said, they're honed in. They're not too far off. They're not too distracted. And I think that sort of simplicity, of course, with the performance to match, really does create that wholesome feeling that, um, which is really nice, especially because a lot of the songs are darker or more troubled. Um, yeah, I almost want to say I prefer it to Waltzing Matilda at times, just because it's a little shorter. It's the strings aren't as cheesy sounding, I would say, which is also kind of a plus. Um,
yeah, and that's what I'll say really quick is that the reason why Waltzing Matilda is actually like not in my top 3 or 5 is just because it's too long. And again, like I don't mind longer songs, but to have like a basically like a ballad be that, and I know it's like a lot of storytelling, and the lyrics are really great in that song, but it's just like too much. He kind of repeats the chorus a little too many times, and that's why I can appreciate. I wish it was in New Orleans because it's like very to the point. Or even I can't wait to get off work, where it's like there's not like a ton of lyrics, and the lyrics that are there, he kind of gets to the point. Like he's just kind of like describing his time at work, and I again it's like I guess like in both songs and in a lot of these songs, sometimes it's just him listing what he's doing. But there's some certain times with the music where I can totally envision it, like sweeping. He's like sweeping up by the cigarette machine. Maybe it's because he repeats it a couple of times, but it's like that really sticks in my head. Where like whilst Matilda, it is kind of more just I feel like a ton of scenes in a row. So yeah, there's something like I much prefer Jitterbug Boy, and I wish it was yeah, both those songs. I wish it was in New Orleans, Jitterbug Boy, and I can't wait to get off work over Waltz and Matilda. Even though I know that's like one of his more signature songs, it's just like it's just a little too long for me. And again, like some of these songs, you know, Small Change I think is a little too long. Woman Got Away I think is a little too long. Um, you know, Bad Liver, like some of them I do wish were like a little shorter. I think that would have made me enjoy the album just a little bit more.
yeah, because a lot of the songs, I mean, all the songs are slow paced except for Step Right Up and Pacey's in a G string. But Pacey's in a G string is only 2.5 minutes. So you basically got like 8 minutes of, like fast tempo songs, and then I guess, 40 minutes of ballads, kind of. Ballads or storytelling.
Yeah, which I think to kind of to sum it up a little bit, I think this album is going to be one I return to when I'm in a very particular mood. I actually think you gave me this album kind of around a good time because it's been kind of fitting with this kind of fall weather for me a little bit. Like it's an album where it's like either you want to sit down with it because you want to really enjoy the lyrics, which I do think is the best selling point to this album is the lyrics. But like if you want just an album where it's like a little bit more like a little slower pace, a little bit more like I don't know, like just nothing that'll like take you away too much. Like this is like the album. And I feel like this is an album I'll put on. Like I said, either because I really want an album with great lyrics, or I'm gonna put the album on because the music is I don't want to call it background music because that is an insult. And I'm definitely not trying
Well,
to
think
insult the
about it
album.
though. Like a lot of this is it's supposed to be kind of like the bar vibe or a diner vibe, like where things are going on, but he's putting his soul out there for everyone to see, who decides to listen. Like I think the music does kind of reflect that, and I think it does make a great background music album for that. But it's nice that if you actually tune in though, in the same sitting down for background music, if you just decide to tune into the lyrics, then you have a whole new experience and you know.
Yeah. And like I said, I'm very curious about his other albums. I know he's someone that hasn't released anything in like a while. Um, and I know he's been doing other stuff. Actually, what was it, last year? I believe it was last year for the Oscars. I watched a movie called, I can't think of what it's called now. He made a cameo in it. I can't, it's going to bug me now. I can't think of what it's called. But he made a cameo in the film. And it's, again, not really knowing him. It was funny that I recognized him. Licorice Pizza, that's what it's called, by the way. Was a pretty good film, but
Oh, I've heard of that.
yeah, he plays a small role in it. And hearing this album, it almost seems like he's playing himself. It's very funny. Like in the movie, he's playing like a very like kind of like grumpy character, but he's also kind of eccentric, like the way he talks, and he's like they're in a restaurant, and he's like drinking and stuff, so telling stories. And but I'm very curious like his other albums sound like, because I would like to hear him, especially maybe his 90s output, especially the songs where he was working with Primus. I'd be very interested to hear him with more of a backing band, and maybe just different, instead of this kind of piano, little jazzy. I'd like to hear him like do some other type of music. And I would like to hear where he came before this. If you said, Closing Time is more like a straightforward album, I'd like to hear that too, because some of my favorite songs on this album were actually more the straightforward, like, Jitterbug Boy, I Wish It Was in New Orleans. So what would you recommend me next from this album?
See, that was even something that I was thinking about when I was trying to figure out the album to give you to start with, is because I don't know all the Tom Waits album by far. I only know a handful of them, but that's because, his style is so different. Like I'm just going to pick and choose what I like. And by doing so, yeah, like there's sort of a path you make. And this path that I want to kind of guide you on, it can kind of go two routes. I could like show you the other end of the pool here, and you could go for Bone Machine, which I think is a really good, like, the production is total opposite. Take away all the jazz, get kind of lo-fi, get really compressed, get grating sounds. Like it is a pretty big change. Pun definitely intended. But I would maybe suggest an album like Blue Valentine, because there's definitely still storytelling songs. A song Red Shoes by the Drugstore. It's kind of like Small Change, Got Rained On by Zone 38. Like it has that sort of what do you call it? Noir fiction.
Yeah.
And then there's a lot of like, well, there's a couple really emotional sort of ballads, I would say. Christmas Card from a Hooker in Minneapolis.
I remember hearing that one being talked about on that YouTube channel.
Yes, wonderful song. Same with Kentucky Avenue and the title track Blue Valentines. I think the only reason I didn't pick that one to start with was because there's a few songs that I think I mean, of course, most albums will have a few songs that are kind of forgettable. I just felt the ones on Small Change were at least more cohesive. And the album was more of an experience, where I feel like Blue Valentines, I think it's a great album, but on first listen, I wasn't really super into the whole album. I was really into the few songs that I really liked. If that makes sense.
Yeah, it does. And I will say that I did enjoy this album a lot. It's an album that I think I will come back to, and it does make me excited to listen to those other songs. And yeah, I think it was a good starting off point for me with Tom Waits. And again, we'd love to hear comments from our listeners, whether this is an album you heard for the first time, like me, or whether it's an album that you've known about for a while and has been listening to it a lot, like Tony. And I think this is a good time. I think for our future episodes, for our listeners, if they want to join along with us, let's give each other the albums really briefly without saying too much, giving it away too much. Let's give each other the albums that we're going to be listening to next month for next month's album for album. I'll start. The album I'm going to give you to listen to next month is going to be the album Punisher by Phoebe Bridgers. It is her second studio album, and it came out in the year 2020.
My album that I'm going to give you is going to be from Incubus. It's going to be their 2006 release, Light Grenades.
All right. So if you've heard either of these albums or you haven't heard either of these albums, this would be the perfect time to go give them a listen, because sometime next month is when we will be releasing the episodes, an episode each for both albums. And you can join along, listen to them for the first time with us, or give your input if it's an album you already know and love. And I think that'll do it for this episode. Next week, we are going to be tackling the two new Red Hot Chili Peppers albums, Unlimited Love and The Return of the Dream Canteen. And we got a little kind of fun game with that one. We'll give it away, but we're doing something a little special. It won't be an album review for the albums, but it's a little special thing we're going to do.
Was that a joke, by the way? You don't want to give it away?
Oh, yeah. No pun intended. We're not going to give it away. I think we're going to have an album appreciation episode probably following that. And then after our other 2 month, next month's album episodes, we're probably going to do a little holiday theme episode. So stay tuned for that. But until then, we hope you take care, and we'll see you soon.